Hey, my friends. Thanks for joining me today. This is Connie Cotter, Succeeding in Business Analysis. And it's true that writing requirements is a large portion of what the business analyst responsibilities are. However, we do so much more than just, quote, write requirements. We've talked previously about the different types of requirements, and today let's go a little deeper into the user requirements, which I feel are actually the most important type of requirement. Because if we don't meet our stakeholders, our end users, our customers' needs and their objectives, then the change we implement cannot be called successful. As we continue on this journey together, I'm going to start sharing the why and the how, rationale behind what writing requirements, the what that we do. So we've got stakeholders, end users, and customers. These definitions come from the BA book, which I reference frequently. And in the purple box on the bottom, you can see that really the most important things to determine if we have a successful outcome of our project and our business analysis activities is if we have a good understanding of their needs, we help clarify those needs in our requirement statements, and we deliver a solution that supports those needs. As we ask our stakeholders about their needs for the change, we will need to extract information from those conversations into the system and user requirements that we will eventually write. For the system or the user and stakeholder requirements, we will want to understand and clarify the basic questions of who, what, why, how, where, and when. So who are the stakeholders and the end users and those impacted roles within this change? Who will use the new features or the changed process or the new system? What do they want to accomplish? Or what is the result of this change? Why? Why do they want this change? How are they going to interact with it? Why do they want this? How will they be impacted by the change? Where in the process do their needs fit? And when does their involvement or their impact occur? Does the sequence of these requirements matter? Does the sequence of their requests matter? So it takes some inquisitiveness, as I've always said, be curious, and asking why several times to find the true reason or motivation for their requirements. I frequently refer to the BA BOK, or the Guide of the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge, version 3, so I can stay consistent in my understanding and make sure that I am teaching, training, and coaching on the foundational principles from the BA BOK. Now, admittedly, I don't have these texts or all the definitions memorized word for word, yet I want to always make sure that I have the correct context when doing my work and when I'm training stakeholders and others. So a requirement, very simply, is a usable representation of a need. So we have user requirements, the needs of the users, we have system requirements, the needs of the system, and we have the business requirements, which are the needs of the business or the objective of the project. Excuse me. I was setting some context with requirement. I was just curious, and so I looked up on thesaurus.com for synonyms of a requirement. So you might also think of these are the conditions, the demands, the essential activities that must be completed by our business partners and stakeholders. These are musts or the must-have or the necessity, needs, or requisite things in order for them to do their jobs. So I invite you, if it helps, to sometimes swap out the word requirement with condition or must-have or essential as you work with your stakeholders to define their requirements. So we can say, for example, our user requirements definition from the BA BOK is a description of the needs of the particular stakeholder or class of stakeholders that must be met in order to achieve the business requirements. They serve as the bridge between the business requirements and the various categories of the solution requirements. So a bridge between those business needs and those solution essential capabilities. So as I mentioned, business requirements are the goals and objectives of the change or of the project, and they provide the scope in which the user and other system requirements provide, and it provides the boundaries. All right, so for our user requirements, again, like I said, those are the most important. I want to encourage you to use the user story format, whether you're using a waterfall approach, a hybrid approach, or an agile approach. I think that the user story, which is a small, concise statement of functionality or a quality needed to deliver value to a specific stakeholder. And the important thing I want to highlight in that definition is delivering value. It's a requirement, a need, an essential capability if it provides value to the business stakeholder. So we write user requirements to focus on the users. If you're working on an integrated system, for example, the user may not be a human. It may be another system. And so without a user of some type and expressing their needs, we don't have a reason to proceed with the change. The standard user story format is as a user role. I want to take some action or perform an activity so that I can accomplish a goal, fulfill a reason for that action. So I want to break this down into these three elements. The user role really specifies that end user. So who is requesting this feature? Who will use this feature? Without a defined user role, we don't really know who is going to need or who is asking for this particular requirement in the project. Again, the user role is not an individual person, and it may not be a job description or a job title, but it is a role that is played in a process. The action or the activity identifies the capability or the feature of our requirement. So it answers the question, what do we want to do? What does that user role want to accomplish? Or how will they be impacted by the change? A user requirement exists because somebody wants to do something. And generally it's to help automate or add efficiency to a more manual process. So if the system, the process, or the change is not going to provide value to that stakeholder, maybe it's not really a requirement. And if they can't define what they want to accomplish, it may not be a requirement, or you need to ask them some more questions. And then that last portion, the reason or the goal. And this provides the rationale for the request and answers the question, why is this requirement important? If a stakeholder cannot tell you why this change, the new process, the impacted process, the new system, the enhanced system, that feature will benefit them, or if it will bring value, maybe their request isn't a requirement either. So this small sentence, small concise sentence, as the BA-Bach definition gave us, has very important elements to it that answer a lot of questions as we proceed through our project. So a few examples here. As a report engineer, I want to filter the content of my productivity report so I can choose the details I want to include in the report. Very simply, I've highlighted those three areas. So who? The report engineer. They want to filter the content of their productivity report, and the value that it's going to bring to them, or the reason they want to do this, is so they can choose the details to include in that report. We can also add conditional elements to the user story when we want to further clarify and answer additional questions of where in the process does this occur, or when does this user need this requirement to happen. So a few conditional examples, and I've put the conditional in the turquoise text. So at the end of each calendar month, that tells us when. When does this feature capability have to be available? To whom is the payroll manager? They want to receive hours worked each day by each employee. so they can review for accuracy. That's the reason why they want that information. And again, when or where is before generating the payroll, the employee's paycheck. Short sentences, lots of information. So I hope you're seeing that the clarity within these examples of what a single sentence can bring. Each single sentence should create a little scenario in your mind. Can you visualize who is impacted? What do they want to do? Why do they want to do it? How will their job be impacted? And hopefully it becomes easier after this changed. The user story format provides value and clarity to everyone on your team, not just your business stakeholders or the end user. Certainly the end users and those impacted users, they can see themselves in these mini scenarios. They can see themselves when they're the report engineer or when they're the payroll clerk. If the written user story does not accurately represent their needs for the change, they will let you know during the review. That's happened to me. By tying that to that user role, you can really bond and make that end user, that subject matter expert, understand the scenario that's contained within that user story. Your development engineers or the vendor, if it's working with a vended solution, they can use the user story to understand roles and permissions if they need to set up certain security permissions. They can also visualize and understand the process that the user requirement needs to accomplish within the system. The reason or the goal helps them in their design efforts. They can see how actions are interconnected. If there's a common reason and there's a series of user stories that are supporting that same reason, they can tie those together in their design. The software quality testers, they can use each user story as a starting point for their test cases and their test scripts, because again, it's that mini scenario that needs to be tested. They can also apply those roles to test permissions and the desired outcome for those roles. So if they're going to be testing, they can bundle up all of the user stories for a given user role and test them together. And trainers. So when we're getting ready to deploy this change, the trainer can start with the user stories to create an outline of the process. They could use that information to draft roles and permissions matrix. Start with training documents, a sequence, or help the end users understand why the features and the changes were made to the system. So when I started my BA training or training my BA team, and our stakeholders in the user story format, I would review the statements, and often that last part, the reason or the goal, was left off because it was not something that we had generally asked for with each user requirement. And at first, the business stakeholders struggled a little bit when pressed to identify the reason for a given requirement. I'd keep asking questions, and I would advise my BAs to ask questions like, well, what will you gain with this change? Or what would be the consequence if we don't make this change or implement this requirement? I'm happy to say that eventually my business stakeholders started talking in user story format. I consider that a win. They would put on their hats as a user role, as a report engineer. I want to be able to do this and this and this and this. And the reason for the first one is here, and the reason for the second one is here. Or they would just start talking. As a user role, I want to do this activity so that I can do XYZ with their rationale. So again, thank you for joining me. And as you gather information from your stakeholders and you draft your user stories, I invite you to think of the questions we talked about above: who, what, when, where, why, how. And share this explanation with your stakeholders to help them understand these formats as well. Tell them why you are doing what you do beyond just writing requirements. I just want to remind you that you are so amazing. You are doing this, you're making progress in your learning, and you're advancing your career. I am honored to be on this journey with you. So until next time, be curious,